Hello, and welcome to our Health and Care Professions Council session today. My name is Florence Milliken, and I am the Professional Liaison Consultant for Northern Ireland at the HCPC. I was a registrant myself, having worked as a physio in Northern Ireland for many years, and I always had a really keen interest in this topic, so I am delighted to be talking to you today about supporting employees with a particular focus on preceptorship. So our session should be no more than 45 minutes and really is aimed at those who employ, lead or manage our registrants. It won't be recorded, and you'll see we have a Q&A function there as well for any questions that relate to today's topic, and my colleagues will be endeavouring to respond to as many questions as they can. If your question doesn't get answered, please do get in touch with us after the event. We'd like to hear from you. I do plan to use a little bit of Slido for some interaction, so if you could open www.slido.com on your browser, it's not easy to say, and just use the code precept when that comes up. That would be really helpful to have that ready. And you will get a copy of the slides after the event as well. So that's all I need to say about introduction. So let me just, I think before we even get started, I just want to acknowledge that we recognise there is a plethora of excellent work that is being done regarding supporting staff. And we at the HCPC know we are just another one of several voices bringing our own unique perspective to the table, alongside people like professional bodies, education providers, employers and managers all alike. It's probably fair to say nurses have been leading the way in this area of preceptorship, and we really have benefited from much of their work. But we've had something more specific for our registrants now for some time, since we published our preceptorship principles in November 2023. So they've been around a while, and we're always keen to hear any feedback on these. So for anybody who has been using them, please do get in touch with us. Now, around the same time, NHS England Workforce Education and Training, they also developed a lot of work around this, including an AHP preceptorship framework that puts really a lot of the meat on the bones, if you like, of our principles and their resources, and they're all widely available, so do check those out. There's also a lot of case studies online from a variety of sources, which really demonstrates that there is a lot of work happening in this area, and I will be pointing you towards some of these great resources at the end. So I just wanted to say a big thank you to those individuals and the organisations who have been sharing their work and making it available for us. Now, in preparation for this session today, I came across actually some new rules within our professions to support the implementation of preceptorship programmes, which I found just all very encouraging. And we do know from our survey entitled A Year in Registration in 2024 that many respondents to that survey felt very well supported. These are people who have been just out in the workplace for a year. And they do feel well supported. They have benefited from structured learning periods, from lighter caseloads, from frequent supervision and opportunities to shadow professionals. But there did remain some variation in provision of preceptorship across our professions and across our 4 nations. We saw 28% of our respondents reported not having any structured learning period on entering practice. Although that said, that is a small improvement from last year's findings. But many of those who did lack the structured support, they said it had a negative or a very negative impact on their transition from learning to practice. So it is our hope that the principles that we have, that we've provided, might be an opportunity for a more standardised approach. And perhaps you are feeling that you'd like a bit more support in this area, and I know from our questions that we get that some of you are keen to know even where do you start. And if so, this is a good place to start, just getting familiar with the principles that we have. But do check out the resources that I'll direct you to later, and maybe even you'll be able to reach out to some others who are on the webinar today. So I want to just ask you the question, and this is really just to get you thinking, and thinking, what is your relationship with preceptorship like at the moment? We have a wide variation, we know, of professions within our remit today. different experiences, working in a variety of contexts. And I'm always curious to know, like, why have people taken the time out of their busy schedules to join? So if you didn't mind, if you were able to do that, just to click on what is your relationship with this term or with this process of preceptorship like? And I appreciate maybe your answer might not fit neatly into one of the boxes, but which one maybe most closely aligns with where you're at with it. So whether you have a program already established and you're keen just to check out, maybe there is something else that you should be considering, or maybe you've heard about these principles and it being talked about, but as yet nothing in place, but you're planning to start something soon. Or maybe it's just a luxury that you haven't had the time for, either to get it started or to continue with it, but you feel you probably should know more about it. Or maybe you're just not entirely sure what it is or what it should look like in practice, or even what the purpose of it is. And I think this question just forces us really to reflect and pin down where we are with this topic. So we can see results coming in already, and we'll come back to that just in a wee second. So here's our plan for today. It's looking at how we support our staff with a clear focus on preceptorship. So we're going to look at what preceptorship is, the benefits of it, both to the individual and the organisation, and link it to our standards, of course. We'll look at the preceptorship principles and some other resources, and then other ways we have of supporting our staff. So there's our results in of our first poll, and I can see that 63% have an established programme already, and that's brilliant, brilliant for us to know about. And you know, there will be some there who recognise, yes, it's needed and would like a bit of support in getting started. And for those who have got established programmes, if there's any way of you sharing some of the information you have and the different ways that you can do, maybe through professional bodies, get in contact with us as well, because we're always keen to know more about the programmes, and we can put those into any of our updates in our preceptorship guidance document. So that is great. And others who can reach out, if you can, even on this call, do that through the Q&A. Now, we know there will be many ways that you already support your staff, and preceptorship is just another cog in that way. So just to get us all reflecting and sharing, can you share what you see as the key ways that you already support your staff? I think it's good to acknowledge there's lots of ways you already do this, and hopefully you see that probably most of them connect into preceptorship as well. So if you can, type away there just the various different ways that you have already of supporting your staff. And I'm going to move on, and hopefully you can continue to do that while I continue to talk, and it stays on there for you. And we'll come back to that in a wee second. I can see people are typing away, which is wonderful. Thank you for that. Keep typing if you can. So let's just clarify what we're talking about when we use the term preceptorship. So we would say preceptorship is a period of structured support provided to HCPC registrants at key moments of career transition. And we'll call those who are receiving preceptorship the preceptee, and those providing the support the preceptor. Now, you're maybe like me, but in my day, a while ago, preceptorship was only offered to newly qualified staff for their first 6 months of their working life. And then after that, it wasn't actually talked about again. But the definition has moved on since then, and we now recognise preceptorship is needed at any key moment of career transition. So really, whether your staff member is a new graduate or is returning to practice after a time away, like a career break, or if they're internationally trained, or they're new to the UK register, or if they've had a significant change in their job role, then you can see that list. Preceptorship is going to be really helpful in supporting them in those different transitions. Now, why were we interested? Why did we take a seat at the table? Well, we have a statutory role. That is, it's required by law to protect the public. As you can see, it's at the heart of what we do. And you may have noticed that we now have a new data hub full of interesting information for you, and it tells us we have over 350,000 registrants across 15 different professional groups. And we're seeking to promote high quality professional practice for them in a number of different ways. Now, we're probably known most for our regulatory function there at the top left. That is setting the standards, approving programmes, keeping a register of the professionals who've completed them, and then, of course, acting if professionals fail to meet the standards. But as you know, the best protection you can have is always prevention rather than reactive. So we're also using our data and our learning to look at the contributing factors which can lead to patient harm. And then we do what we can to try and reduce these. And one of those areas that's attracting probably a lot of attention these days is workforce planning. And that's because of the impact of staff shortages, not only in the patients themselves, but on staff as well who are feeling burnt out. And we know there are high vacancy rates and more staff leaving means that the makeup of the workforce is becoming more junior and less experienced. So new registrants are facing many challenges that can build to the point that many leave their first jobs prematurely. Now, some of you may have seen our data on retention rates for each profession that we hold. It shows that on average, 1 in 18 of all new registrants actually deregister within 4 years. And it's the smaller professions like prosthetists and orthotists that have a higher rate of 1 in 8, and international registrants just over 1 in 3. And indeed, one of the questions asked before our session was, well, how do we support new starters without overwhelming them, but equally ensuring an awareness of the increased demands on time and resources that our services now have? And it's a great question, and it raises that kind of dichotomy or that tension between the reality of the potential demands on an employee and the reality of what one employee can be expected to achieve. So we grabbed a seat at the table because we knew we needed to be part of any process that would welcome and integrate our registrants safely into their new workplace, and would support employers as well to create the right environments for that to happen and for them to achieve their full potential. And it's clear that preceptorship really can do that. So what should a preceptorship programme contain? Well, that will depend very much on your context and your resources. So at the HCPC, we don't state specifics about what it must contain, but rather we offer principles for what it might look like, with the idea that you will develop it for what is right for your profession and department. And you may get some ideas as we talk about this today. Now remember, the goal is to support the transition into new employment. It's not to retest clinical competencies. So it could include multi-professional topics, like helping staff to understand what the policies and the procedures of the organisation and their department are. And that could lead to important discussions on things like how you deal with a complaint or how to raise a concern, or more profession-specific things like providing support clinically with their hands-on training, maybe reviewing case studies, discussing treatment plans, and offering feedback, all with the view to developing confidence. And in one case study actually that I read, the programme also included leadership skills and coaching and a quality improvement project, and the preceptee themselves said that they found that was actually the most helpful aspect. And it can also be a good time to help a preceptee to identify learning needs and develop a learning plan to support their ongoing professional development, building their confidence and just that feeling of value, which will hopefully help them to stay with you and help with that retention. But it will be up to you to use the available resources, including our principles and everything else there is, to develop what is needed for your staff. And I would probably guarantee that you will already be doing many of the elements of the preceptorship already, but potentially just not actually calling it a preceptorship programme. So, why do preceptorship? Well, I don't know if you can remember your first 6 months as a healthcare professional. Or it might be more recently, it's something, if you're taking on a new role, maybe that's an easier thing to remember. But you might be able to relate to some of these perceived concerns that newly qualified paramedics commencing their careers have made. So these new graduates are, on the whole, very excited to get started, putting all their theory work into practice. But in this paper by Thompson, confidence was one of their main concerns, and the responsibility of being an autonomous practitioner, making clinical decisions without the safety net of a supervisor, or even just learning how you deal with people. And then also heightened fears around losing their registration if they did the wrong thing. And just that challenge as well of bridging the gap from theory to practice. So those are some of the concerns anyway that these new graduate paramedics had. So when we look at the benefits of preceptorship, we can see that the building up of confidence is probably one of the key roles. So confidence in both their clinical and non-clinical aspects. The concerns listed by the paramedics in the previous slides certainly relate strongly to clinical expertise, but other research points towards smaller things even in the workplace, which when they're addressed, make a big difference in feeling like you belong here. Even things like somebody mentioned knowing that there was a secure fridge where lunch could be stored, or that there was a locker for them for their valuables. And it just sends a message that we value you. So staff who feel welcomed and valued, who feel they have a role here because someone took time to ensure they understood that role, they will more likely develop a loyalty with the organisation and stay, which obviously is going to help with retention. And we've also heard how preceptorship can provide a safe space for the disclosure of both positive and difficult information. So if concerns arise, they can be escalated promptly. Now, this is hugely topical this week in Northern Ireland with the leaked report around toxic cultures in one of our trusts. But we've all seen reports regarding concerns around culture and in some professions around sexual misconduct. And our statistics reveal that the most commonly targeted staff are younger colleagues, or any time, in fact, when there is a larger power imbalance. So it's therefore vital that to keep staff and patients safe, there must be an opportunity for staff to raise such concerns and to learn how to go about that. And then it's also the perfect opportunity to set the tone or the culture in your department right from the beginning. So you may need to ask yourself and your colleagues, for example, are we proactively implementing a just and a learning culture, for example? Could we be providing examples of how we ourselves have learned from our mistakes and how we are happy to share these at team meetings for the good of the department? I often think it would be quite unique to see managers make an example of a staff member when something has gone wrong, not highlighting their failures, but actually highlighting how they did the right thing when the wrong thing happened. And many preceptorship programs, they also use it as a time to discuss the preceptee's career development plans. Again, just demonstrating that genuine interest in this new team player, again, linking in with retention. But of course, it benefits the career development of the preceptor too, because then they have the opportunity to develop leadership, teaching, mentoring and coaching skills and all that collaborative working maybe with other professionals, which all works to enhance the holistic approach to patient care. And many do find it very rewarding to know that they are contributing to the next generation of culture shapers in our organisations. And then finally, it's also a great opportunity to empower our preceptees by asking them to share their first impressions of their culture that they've come into. Like the proverbial fish swimming in water, we tend not to see the culture that we are surviving in. And they can also bring in fresh ideas as well from previous experiences. But then, of course, we must be open to the new ideas that we hear. This is sometimes called reverse mentorship. So, for example, in some cases, experienced staff who joined the profession many years ago may not have been trained to do certain things like reflection, which we know is so vital to learning at all stages of our careers, but yet more junior staff may well be very comfortable with those processes. So if that is something that becomes apparent during preceptorship, then there's no reason why they can't be used to share their examples and demonstrate what they have learned through the process. And reverse mentorship is actually something that has been done at the HCPC, and our leaders have also reported the many benefits, not least recognising what talent there is on the ground. So when you start to consider the benefits, I think you can see here preceptorship. Hopefully you'll get ideas of what you need to include in it. I mentioned at the beginning that we bring our unique voice to the conversation, and also that preceptorship is a way of meeting some of our standards. So our registrants, I think they appreciate reassurance that they are meeting their standards appropriately. So I want to highlight some of the examples of how it relates to the standards. And as you'll know, we have 3 key sets of standards for our registrants. The first, what we show here, is our standards of conduct, performance and ethics. And the updated standards went live in September last year, and they provide registrants with the behaviours expected of them. HCPC does not mandate preceptorship specifically, but we do state that registrants must seek feedback and use it to improve practice, and also work in partnership with colleagues, sharing your skills, knowledge and experience where appropriate. So preceptorship gives an opportunity to meet this standard, either as a preceptee or as a preceptor. And then we have our standards of proficiency for each professional group, which set clear expectations of the knowledge and abilities required to start practicing. And to be honest, there were a number of points that we could have pulled out here, which could relate to preceptorship, but here are just a few. So we can see here in 4.8, understand the need. This is what registrants need to do. They need to understand the need for active participation in training, supervision and mentoring in supporting high standards of practice and personal and professional conduct, and the importance of demonstrating this in practice. Our registrants need to promote and engage in the learning of others. They need to understand the value of reflective practice, and they need to record the outcome of such reflection to support continuous improvement. And then 14.2, to demonstrate awareness of relevant health and safety legislation and comply with all local operational procedures and policies. And again, that's just listed because that's something that can be done in preceptorship. So hopefully you can see there all those standards would be fulfilled through preceptorship. And then of course we've got the CPD standards. So all registrants must be engaging in CPD throughout their career, but especially in starting a new role. And so preceptorship will be a great support in helping registrants to know what is expected of them in this new role, and then to identify what their gaps are, and then how they go about bridging those gaps through their CPD. Okay, so these are our principles, and we encourage our registrants to use them either to ask for preceptorship at key transition moments in their careers if it's lacking, or to use them to support the development of existing preceptorship programs to better meet their needs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you each principle, just so that you can become more familiar with them. But rather than read out each point now, I would encourage you just to reflect on them in more detail in your own time, just thinking through maybe either how you're already applying it or how you could be applying it. And you may decide a certain point is not relevant for your particular context, and that's absolutely fine. But hopefully you will find, or you will see, the principles are helpful in shaping what it is that you want to provide. So you'll see here from this example that each principle has a headline statement and then a series of recommendations for how that statement can be met. So they do connect with the NMC principles, but they are tailored to the range of professions that we regulate and the settings in which they would work. So principle 1 relates to the culture in your organisation, and it highlights that preceptorship should be part of that culture of promoting learning, self-reflection and safe practice, which all helps to develop confidence. And because we know periods of transition are a stressful time for registrants, they also highlight, you can see there, the need to consider how you prioritise, for example, the health and the well-being of registrants as well. And we already alluded to that last point there about it being an opportunity to set the tone on day one, that this organisation's culture is one of learning, self-reflection and safe practice. And we do know that some of our professions have a culture that reflections actually are only happening when something goes wrong. And there are many other barriers to reflection. So maybe this in itself is a topic that could be covered in a preceptorship programme if you felt that was relevant. And then principle 2 here relates to its quality and its oversight, and it highlights that there does need to be some processes and systems in place to ensure that it is happening even when challenges arise, and also that its effectiveness is being evaluated, for example, through audit. And this is maybe a chance to say that if anybody cares to share ways in which they are already doing that through our Q&A, I think others would probably appreciate that. So you can do that Principle 3 then relates to preceptee empowerment. It highlights what the preceptee needs to get the most out of preceptorship and to build their confidence. So, for example, it needs to be flexible enough to be tailored to them and their situation. They need to have an identified preceptor for the duration of the process and have some say over its length and its content. So we do encourage the preceptee to not simply be passive recipients of their preceptorship, but actually to be quite proactive and responsible themselves for completing it, so that they can then help to shape it in a way that reflects their needs. But they'll likely need encouragement and feel that they have the autonomy from you to do that as they go along. And just a reminder, we don't specify what it should look like for this very reason. Now, principle 4 then looks more at the role of the preceptor and what an effective preceptor should do. So you probably expect there to be some role modelling in there to encourage a supportive, a constructive and compassionate approach here, as you see in point A. But it also suggests things like helping the preceptee to engage with the wider profession, help them to build networks. And those are things that could easily be overlooked. Those networks are something that we take for granted once we are established in our roles, but it can be really hard to break into whenever we're new. And yet they are very helpful when you are trying to find your feet. And we know much research has been done recently on the importance of collaborative working for safe healthcare as well. So that's important too. And in fact, while the preceptor should be a registered clinician, it doesn't need to be somebody from the same profession. There are many multi-professional preceptorships that are invaluable in strengthening this whole concept of collaborative working right from the get-go. Staff get that opportunity, I think, to share their experiences, and it can really add deeper understanding of how they fit into the wider context of patient care as well. And we pick that point up in parts B and D again. So we encourage you just to use these points to stop and reflect on what you're providing for your staff. So, for example, you may even need to be a bit more proactive in addressing any cultural or any habitual dismissive looks or remarks that we sometimes experience regarding other professions. Again, just setting that right tone right from the very beginning. Of course, if the preceptor is of a different profession, there'll need to be some unique professional support in there as well. And links obviously should be made within the profession too. And preceptors, of course, can be of a variety of experiences. Sometimes one who's quite new, who experienced a good preceptorship program, can be just as knowledgeable as a preceptor who brings maybe years of experience. Some may feel as if they have imposter syndrome, maybe not quite sure how best to support their preceptees. So we do encourage some training in this role, whether that's through formal training or a mentor or even a community of practice as well. And also to keep asking for feedback on how they're doing. And then the last principle 5, looks at things to consider when you're actually delivering the preceptorship program itself. So, for example, it needs to reflect the preceptee's role and their development, both immediate and long term. So, for example, it may actually link into some new management training courses that are available and link in with their CPD as well. And it should also help them to meet their own professional needs and their regulatory obligations as well. So those are the principles. And I haven't had time to go through each point. Maybe you'd be glad to know that. So again, I encourage you to do that yourself. It really is up to you to put the meat on the bones for these principles. But there is a huge amount of support out there as well. But our document does go on then to expand a wee bit more on those principles, what they might look like in practice for registrants. And I've included, this is what I've included here, just one example here for what that might look like. And then our document then finishes with a note to those who are working outside the NHS, including those who are working as sole practitioners as well, because we do acknowledge there are difficulties in accessing preceptorship here. So there are some points to consider here as well. And then we also refer to preceptorship for internationally recruited registrants as well. And we would just remind you about, we do have an ongoing joining the UK workforce webinar and workshops for them too. So you can contact us about that if you're not familiar with those. And there are also some details then of arrangements by the different UK nations where there are some in place. But the plan is to keep this document under review. So we could add any other programmes that may be developed in subsequent editions, as I kind of alluded to earlier, so that we can just help point registrants to those. So if you have something, if you have a programme or resources that you think we could include, then please do let us know about that. And then we finish our document just with links to various professional bodies who also have produced profession-specific guidance for you. And I would strongly recommend checking those out, particularly to read about any examples that they have included. But there is a lot of support out there for you in that. So right at the beginning, I did ask you to share the many ways that you already support your staff. And it's nothing, maybe nobody has been able to put it in. Oh, there's somebody typing for me now. Maybe it moved on before you got a chance to do that. So this is active. But anyway, I'll move on to the sort of things that we normally get, because you probably would see saying the same sort of things that we normally hear. So, I mean, we have things like induction, supervision, mentoring, coaching. Those are all the usual things. If anybody wants to throw up anything else, that would be really good. Even just regular supportive conversations, you know, those kind of water cooler chats, those kind of casual, chatty conversations in the office, even those centered on non-work topics, those are really supportive to staff to make them feel like belonging. Reflective practice is another one. Regular one-on-ones, yes, and individual meetings separate from supervision. Yes, thank you. And those might fall under your mentoring or your coaching. Action learning sets, regular mentoring, yes, thank you. Keep typing away there if there's anything else. Action learning cafes, yep, thank you. And even it might even be things like when you refer somebody to occupational health, and that's rather than seeing that as a negative thing, actually it is a very positive, supported thing, or referring them to other professionals as well. Don't forget all the refresher training that you offer staff as well. They really appreciate that. They find that very supportive as well. And supervision too, it hasn't specifically been mentioned there, but we do a training session about supervision, and we know there's different types of supervision. There's clinical supervision, professional, managerial supervision. All those things are very helpful to your staff as well. Okay, thank you for that. So we've mentioned a lot of those things, and I think it's probably fair to say these sort of things, the induction, supervision, reflection, coaching, mentoring, to mention just a few, there's probably a lot of overlaps there in the outcomes of those and the goals of those with our preceptorship as well. And to some of you, I understand that preceptorship probably sounds just like a combination of those things. And that can depend very much on what already happens in your department. You can imagine a very large NHS trust in England, maybe. They have thousands of staff and a large turnover. They've got very different resources, processes and opportunities compared to maybe a very small private firm in Northern Ireland. And I think it's useful just to be aware of the differences in the principles of these and other processes, but just not get too hung up on what you call what is happening. The important thing is, as we always say, is the outcome. Is your staff member getting the support that they need at the important times of their career transition? So that said, although these things, they do reflect into it, I'm going to mention just maybe some of the differences in the principle of what some of these other support mechanisms are. And I appreciate that you may not currently call the elements of what you do preceptorship, but whilst it does have some important distinctions, I think it's fair to say there is some overlap with all of these activities, especially dependent on your context. But I do, as I said before, I guarantee some of you are already doing preceptorship to some degree or another. So induction supervision, well, broadly speaking, induction relates closely to the welcome and that first impression that you give a new member of staff. So whether or not the uniform's there. Is there a locker key there? Have they got their username and their passwords ready for them? It makes a huge difference. And the induction provides probably that basic introduction to the organisation, to the people, to the geography, to the policies and the procedures, along with all the mandatory training that is required. Supervision, much more difficult to define, but most agree it is a process of professional learning and development that enables individuals to reflect on and develop their knowledge, their skills and their competence through agreed and regular support with another professional. Now, we know that there are currently wide variations of what it looks like across regions and professions, but for the purpose of this webinar, I think it's helpful to think of 3 different forms of supervision as we have stated on our website. So as I say, we cover supervision in a lot more depth in our workshops, but suffice to say here, preceptorship probably most closely aligns with the professional supervision. Each aspect of supervision here is different, and it might be done by 3 different supervisors or the same one, just depending on the context. So the managerial supervision and the appraisals are used to assess a person's performance, but the practice and the professional supervision are more about the supporting and the enhancing a person's practice by enabling them to reflect on and review their work. And that often focuses on one area, maybe a case study or a particular clinical area. Preceptorship, on the other hand, is more broader than this here. And supervision is really an ongoing activity throughout your career, whereas preceptorship is for those more difficult transition periods of a new role and the challenges that a new role can bring. So that's one of its unique opportunities, as we said, to shape first impressions on how we do things around here. And in reflection, well, you can see our definition of reflection here. It's a process that helps us gain insight, which we should then apply to develop and improve our practice. And a joint statement by the UK healthcare regulators back in 2019 included that this should be a familiar, continuous and routine part of the work of health and care professionals. So it is more than just discussing a patient or a scenario. It is a cognitive process that helps you to identify what went well or was challenging, and then processing that so that you learn from it. So it really is key to bridging that gap between the theory and the practice, which you remember junior staff in particular can find really daunting. And as I said earlier, unfortunately, some of our professions are only involved in reflection when there has been a safety incident or a negative outcome. So as employers, I think there's a real need to motivate staff to make reflection part of everyday processes by supporting them to do it as they practice their reflection, particularly when they're starting out, but especially when they're focusing something that has been more challenging, and just help them to see the benefits of the reflection, not just to themselves or to their patients, but the fact that these reflections, especially if something hasn't gone well, that others can benefit from it, and the importance of sharing that. And I think really senior staff probably need to role model that as well. And I think it's important probably for you just to highlight to staff that supervision is not a substitute for reflection, and the same is true for other activities like coaching or clinical case reviews. It is really such an important activity for all healthcare professionals, and it is likely to form part of their CPD. So again, reflection itself is probably a good topic for you to include in your preceptorship programme. I appreciate this slide. It's a bit text heavy, but I did just include it for you to refer back to later. But suffice to say, coaching and mentoring may be a style of support or skill used when you're supporting an individual through a preceptorship programme, but on their own, neither of them would be preceptorship. We haven't time to discuss these processes in detail, and there are plenty of articles out there on each. Simon Sinek, well, he's a well-published author on everything leadership. He would say a mentor is simply someone who has time for you, someone who walks alongside you to guide you on what you can do, rather than someone who walks ahead of you and tells you how they did it. And so it becomes a two-way process. So both parties are learning from each other. And he would say that best mentorship relationships evolve, they aren't assigned. So you can see there is a bit of a difference there with what preceptorship would be. So We're near the end here, so we've covered what we mean by preceptorship, in that it is a period of structured support at any time of career transition. It has many benefits, including increased confidence and therefore satisfaction and better staff retention. We looked at the HCPC principles of preceptorship document and what those 5 principles are for your own further study, and then briefly the other ways that you support your staff. And we do acknowledge the biggest barrier to this is time. It is hard as well to prove or quantify the time that is saved through improved retention rates or not having to deal with issues that have arisen through a lack maybe of awareness or a lack of confidence. But that is what the goal of your preceptorship is, obviously. The goal is providing support so that your registrants are well equipped to fulfil their new job requirements. And I thought I'd just finish with 2 contrasting stories about myself when I had brown hair, and about Hugh. Hugh is my Welsh counterpart when Hugh had hair. And I mean, I tell my story of preceptorship really as a new grad, just to show how important it is to tailor the support that we give to our preceptees, and how everyone has different needs depending on the path that they find themselves on. So very quickly, the word preceptorship didn't exist in my day, but the support was there, and I settled into life as a physio very well because of that support, except in one area, and that was a on-call chest physio. And this was simply because my only placement, which included chest physio, was the 2-week induction that we had. And my junior rotations also didn't include chest work. So when I was put on the on-call rota in a sister hospital that I'd never worked in, I really was very out of my depth. But at the time, I just thought I had to get on with it, and this was the way it was. And looking back, of course, I wasn't proactive enough to get the support that I needed, and my seniors hadn't actually considered that my scope of practice was quite different to others like me, just because of the experiences that I'd had. And I did get called in a few times to some very sick patients in their final hours, and I probably could say it traumatized me in relation to chest physio, even to this day. Now, I know it wouldn't happen nowadays, but it's possible that we do assume staff are confident in areas that they may not be, and we don't appreciate the impact of insufficient support to us, never mind the safety aspects for patients themselves. Now, Hugh, on the other hand, he went through preceptorship as well, albeit in a different century and a different country. When he first started as a newly qualified physio, fresh out of uni, his first real job was in a large acute NHS trust, and he was thrown into the deep end with on-call duties, something expected of all junior rotational staff. And while he had had some respiratory training in university and during his placement intensive care and surgery, that experience had been tough, he said, and he had limited support from his supervisor. So for him, the thought of being on call in a bustling hospital, navigating lots of specialisms and managing critically ill patients as we do on his own, with nothing but a pager and, as he says, his own wits, he says that felt really daunting. But the support he received was excellent, and the induction process assumed no prior knowledge, which he says was crucial. Not every student has effective respiratory placements or the same training. He says if you want people to succeed, you've got to give them the right tools from the get-go. And the training programme was organised with clear policies, processes and gateways for progression. And you didn't even start on-call duties until you'd had enough hands-on experience during a respiratory focused rotation with supervision and support to build your confidence and your competency. And he says what made it even better was that he wasn't going through this alone. He was part of a cohort of other physios, all practicing and sharpening their respiratory skills together. And as he says, there's something very incredibly powerful about learning in a group. And before he knew it, he was not only competent in his role, but he was genuinely enjoying it. And that type of work became one of the most fulfilling parts of his role. And he even went on to supervise students and junior staff in this area. And he says he received much praise from consultants and how he was caring for those very sick patients. So just as our standard of proficiency, they have standards relevant to all professions. then profession-specific ones, well, you can see that would be the same with your preceptorship. There will be things that will be relevant for all professions, and you can do some of your preceptorship together, and then there will be parts that will be more specific to others as well. So I hope today has potentially heightened your interest in the benefits of preceptorship and maybe given you some ideas of how to engage with it. I do encourage anyone on the call who has had great success stories to share that with others where you can. And again, let us know of any programs that we can include in our document. Just before I do give you a wee list of resources that you may find useful, can I ask you to open up this survey if you can to give us your feedback? And I'm going to give you just a moment to do that. And just continue to listen as I just mentioned one or two things just before I finish. So hopefully some of you have got that opened. So there are some resources. I'll not take time to read them all out, but there are some resources I think you'll probably find very helpful, case studies in particular. I would recommend the Preceptorship at Oxley's Foundation Trust if you're starting out new, and they provide some email addresses there as well to contact if you're starting out new with this preceptorship. I just want to remind you too of some of our other Employee Insights webinar programs that's ongoing for you. So you can see those on the screen. You might want to check those out. We've got a new one coming up, the next one, which is all about identifying modern day slavery. And I just want to highlight as well our brand new data hub, if you haven't seen that already. It provides a large amount of information about various aspects of our work so that we can all better understand our workforce across the UK. So for example, let's say you went on to the CPD audit data and you were interested in OTs, you would see that in 2023, a total of 832 registrants were audited, 74.5% audits were accepted. So by far the majority. 18.5 were deferred, 3.2 didn't renew, 3.2 voluntarily deregistered, and only 0.2% were removed. And they're waiting for the outcome of another 0.2%. So it's useful information for yourself and for your staff as well in there. So have a nosy at that too. And then finally, our student competition. If you do have students, please make them aware of this year. We're asking students this year to create a learning session on speaking up and raising concerns. But check out that first prize, £300 voucher, and runners-up get £150 voucher. So if that doesn't get students interested, nothing will. So that's just a wee reminder of mentioning that to our students. So I'm just going to leave the survey, the evaluation form on there for any of you still on the call. If you wouldn't mind, we do look through every one that we get and all the comments, and they are very, very helpful for us as we plan ahead for subsequent sessions that we do. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening, for taking part, and hopefully we'll see you again another time soon. Enjoy the rest of your evening.